Hi, I'm Kurt. Welcome back to Boards 2D. Today we're making a book press. So recently my grandfather was clearing out his garage and he was going to throw away a few boards of wood, a few planks that he had lying around, and instead I thought I would do something with them. I've been meaning to make my own books, or at least bind my own books, for quite some time. I thought it would be a good opportunity to make a book press. So here's how I made it. I selected two boards of wood which were essentially doors from an old cabinet from my grandfather's garage. I removed the screws from the bag to release the actual panel that I would be using. I used an A4 paper to serve as a template for the largest book size that I might be binding in the future. I took some measurements based off that. Once that was done, I proceeded to cutting it on my table saw. I made a slight calculation error when measuring the actual width of the book press. I had to go back and cut a few more pieces and join them together to the actual panels. I used biscuits to join the two panels together, and I had to do this along the end grain. This is not desirable in most cases as the glue joint isn't as strong, but for what I'm about to use it really doesn't make that much difference. I applied a liberal amount of wood glue and tried to stuff it down into the vein as much as possible. It's also very important to put a lot of wood glue in the biscuit holes so that the biscuits really adhere to the wood as they should. Once I aligned the panels onto the biscuits, I clamped them down so that the glue joints remained as small as possible with no visible gap. There was still some misalignment between the two panels. Biscuit joinery is very finicky and it requires a lot of practice to get it right the first time, so I had to use the hand plane to smooth out the difference between the two levels. I also went over this joint with an orbital sander in order to get it as smooth as possible. In the end, it really turned out to be almost seamless. Once I had smoothed out the joint, I went over the whole piece using my orbital sander again. I used a bit of a low grit to tear out most of the varnish, then I worked my way up the grits to leave a very smooth surface that is not scratched or gouged out by the sanding process. I used my table saw once more to trim both pieces of wood. This made sure that both of them are the same exact width and length. I marked 4 equidistant spots on the panel. These will be the holes through which the bolt will then eventually pass. It is very important to take into account the width of the paper that you're going to be using in this book press. Otherwise, the rods will just end up going through the paper and you won't be able to fit your book inside. I clamped the 2 pieces together face to face, and then I used my drill press to drill out the holes, being as precise as possible. It is very important that all the holes on both panels are aligned. I used a round over bit to round over the inner parts of the book press where the pages would meet. I also used a chamfering bit to chamfer the edges of the top and the bottom part of the book press. This is there just to give it an accent, and you don't really need to do this if you're just going for a very basic book press. I smoothed both panels once more using a very fine grit on my orbital sander, and this was done to prepare it for a bit of spray paint. I prepared the hardware that I was going to use. Essentially, bolts, wing nuts, washers and threaded rod. Ideally, I would have used a lock nut instead of 2 nuts running in the opposite direction, or even easier, just use a long bolt with a wing nut and a washer. The book press was essentially done, but I thought that I would make it look a bit nicer, so I broke out my spray paints and painted it black. I made sure not to cover the inside, as I was going to cover it with another material later on. The paint almost dried instantly, but paint has a tendency to make the wood grain pop out. To counter this, I sanded the panels using a fine grit orbital sander once more. And then proceeded to give it yet another coat of black spray paint. Since I didn't want the pages to be scratched on the inside of the book press, or even if I had a leather cover, I decided to line it with contact felt. This is a very easily accessible material. It has a sticky back, so you just peel it off and just attach it to the surface that you need. I aided it a bit with some spray adhesive, as this material had been in my shop for quite some time and was liable not to stick. I went slow and steady to make sure that I didn't trap air bubbles under the felt. Once that was done, I cut out the holes for the threaded rods and the book press was assembled and completed. There are various designs on how to make a book press. I opted for this design because it is what I had on hand in the shop. In fact, I could have made it much simpler if I used actual bolts with a hex head instead of using a threaded rod and 2 nuts. It is what I had on hand, and mostly I aimed not to go buy more materials and sort of recycle and use what I have in the shop. It's a very simple build that anyone can make, and all it takes is just a bit of patience and measuring. And other than that, really it's just cutting up the wood, painting it, maybe rounding the edges. Again, it's one of those projects that you can make as complicated or as simple as you like. Depends what you're going for, whether it's aesthetic or whether it is practicality. I try to find a balance of both. One thing to keep in mind and to note when using this kind of book press is that because I have a seam over here where the 2 panels were joined together using biscuits, sometimes it creaks when I put a large mass of paper and I try to tighten it. So be careful when you're doing that, make sure that you don't damage the book press itself, and that's it. You can find a detailed write-up on my website boardstudy.net, along with some other projects that I've done in the past, as well as you can follow me on social media links, always in the description below, whether it's Facebook, Instagram or Twitter. And as always, just as I have been inspired by other makers out there to come in my shop, make this, I hope that you too can make something, because everyone is a maker.